Good morning, everyone. My name is Nguyễn Vinh, and I am an adjunct lecturer in Vietnamese Studies at Columbia University. And it is my great honor and pleasure to be here at Lubbock, Texas for the first time. And so I have to thank TexasTech University and its Vietnam Center and Archive and the Institute for Peace and Conflict to have organized this conference and invited me to speak here today. And my topic is a little bit long-winded, but very descriptive, if you would put up with it for a little while. It's called Northern Threat and Southern Exceptionalism, Existential Fears and Counterfactual Dreams About Race and Victorious Destiny in the Southern-centric Historiography of Nguyễn Huệ in Wartime Republic of Vietnam. As we well know, after the Geneva Accords of 1954, Vietnam remained divided into two parts. In the north, we have the Democratic Republic of Vietnam, and in the south, the Republic of Vietnam. And this period of disunion brings back echoes of the rivalry between the Trịnh and the Nguyễn during the late Restoration period, 300 years before that, when the Trịnh and the Nguyễn lords fought each other from the 16th to the 18th century. And the Tây Sơn period was the end game of that period of disunion at the end of the 18th century. And the two main protagonists at the end of the Tây Sơn period were Nguyễn Huệ and Nguyễn Ánh, and Nguyễn Huệ is the main protagonist in the paper that I'm presenting today. And so we see echoes of this earlier period of disunion being rehashed during the period of the Vietnam War. And so between the DRV and the RVN, competing regimes of different ideologies and historical legacies, they share similarities, but they also differ in their rival conceptions of national identity and localized visions of victorious destiny. And so this process, these dynamics were crystallized through a common obsession with the Tây Sơn period and the dueling portraits of Nguyễn Huệ and Nguyễn Ánh. But first, let me say a brief few words about the key four thematics of the Tây Sơn historiography during the Vietnam War. First is that in the north, in North Vietnam, the DRV focused on the idea of class struggle, and Nguyễn Huệ was hailed as the hero of the peasant revolution. And so it goes hand in hand with its program of social transformation and anti-imperialism. And in the South, on the other hand, the focus was more on racial survival, which is one of the key topics for my presentation here today. And then we also have shared contention between the two sides over the question of national unification, as well as the nature of conflict, whether it was a war of resistance against foreign aggression, as the North would have it, or a civil war between two sides of two Vietnamese factions, as the South would understand it to be. And so in this paper, I want to focus on what happens in South Vietnam. And so I want to talk about the Northern threat and the idea of Southern exceptionalism. And these two ideas were expressions of a regiocentric identity, which is focused on the South, and a South Vietnam that has been rooted in a legacy of division and southward expansion over the course of the 16th century until today. And so this regiocentric identity would inform a different notion of victorious destiny and the idea of a southern vitality that would overcome and become victorious over its northern rival. And so about the idea of the northern threat, traditionally Vietnam is a southern neighbor of China, which is much larger to the north, and for over 1,000 years in the first millennium AD, Vietnam was occupied by China. So traditionally, China was the eternal enemy of the Vietnamese race. And so the threat of the North was also developed in conjunction with the process of southward expansion, because Vietnam could not expand north against such a large and powerful neighbor to the north. So it would expand southward and and annex many of the smaller countries in its path, such as Champa and Cambodia. And so this idea of northern threat and southern advance is a key theme in the history of the Vietnamese military. A book published in 1969 by the chief military historian of South Vietnam, Colonel Phạm Văn Sơn. And in this, the title of the book itself described the idea of resisting northern invasion, chống Bắc xâm, and southward advance, Nam Tiến. And so historically, as I mentioned earlier, the Chinese Empire was the enemy of the Vietnamese people. And so the idea of racial tension and racial enmity was very deeply ingrained. And therefore, the contemporary alliance between the Northern Democratic Republic of Vietnam and Communist China, the People's Republic of China, during the Vietnam War was conveniently based on an alliance based on class. A shared peasant and proletarian class against the colonial and imperialist. And so it erased the racial tension that has been very pronounced in Vietnamese history vis-a-vis China. And so one of the key expressions in the South which could not and did not erase that racial enmity is the idea that Vietnam would yearn to recover the lost land that it has lost to China traditionally over the course of its 1,000 years of domination. And so that yearning gave rise to a counterfactual dream of racial revenge and existential fear of racial assimilation. And in order to explore this theme further, I would like to examine the fiction and non-fiction of some South Vietnamese intellectual and politicians, namely Nguyễn Mạnh Côn, Hồ Hữu Tường, Nguyễn Ngưu Ý, and even a cameo appearance of South Vietnamese premier Nguyễn Cao Kỳ. And so in Nguyễn Mạnh Côn, we have the idea of alternative stream of history. He developed this idea in a novella called Chuyện ba người lính nhảy dù lâm nạn, the story of three paratroopers in distress, written in the late 1950s. And in that novel, this science fiction account dabbled in Einstein's theory of general relativity and unified field theory to tell the story of traveling back in time to change events of the past in an alternative stream of history. And the historic moment in question was the imminent death of the bedridden Emperor Quang Trung Nguyễn Huệ in 1792. And so as this private medic, Đặng Văn Khang, traveled back, he was given the title Cloud Riding Marquis Đặng Văn Hầu, because he appears out of thin air and appeared to the emperor and brought the magic of modern medicine to rescue the emperor from a dying, probably a stroke. So that was very auspicious and timely, because the emperor was harboring plans to attack China and lead a northern punitive expedition, Bắc Phạt, to defeat the Chinese, the Qing Chinese back in the 18th century. But by extension, in Nguyễn Mạnh Côn writing, that would also prevent the rise of communism. So the brave action of this private medic who rescued the Emperor Guangzhong would also have repercussion to the extermination of communism in the 20th century as well. And so in conjunction with this northern expedition is the dream to liberate and unite China to Vietnam. But as the conquerors, the Vietnamese conquerors would find out to their dismay, China was much larger, much more populous country, so it was much harder to control the territory. And so the Chinese were engaging in the scorched earth guerrilla tactic to bog down the Vietnamese, just like the Viet Minh was conducting guerrilla scorched earth tactics against the French during the First Indochina War. And in this novella, Nguyễn Bảnh Khôn articulated the idea of a sense of pessimism, actually, of demographic assimilation, because even if the Vietnamese could conquer China, in sheer numbers, the Chinese would overwhelm them, and through intermarriage and whatnot, the Vietnamese blood would be assimilated by the vastly outnumbering Chinese race. And so his idea was that we should emphasize perpetual racial conflict as instrumental to self-preservation, because living in peace and living together and intermarrying each other would mean the end of the Vietnamese race when it becomes assimilated to the Chinese race. And so this was the idea of traveling back in time to change history, but in the end, it turns out to be a misguided attempt. And in the end, the private Đặng Văn Khang decided to end his life and try to block out this alternative stream of history. So was it a crazy dream? Because the dreamer, Nguyễn Bảnh Khôn himself, was crazy to come up with this idea, or was because this crazy dream would have unintended consequences, is something that we should reflect upon. And this idea of a crazy dream is also reflected in the writing of Hồ Hữu Tường and Nguyễn Huệ, as I will come to right now. Hồ Hữu Tường is actually the father of my thesis advisor at Harvard, Professor Huệ Tâm Hồ Tài. He has the same surname Hồ Hữu Tường, as the Tây Sơn ancestors from the Hồ family, and one of the popular nickname, family name of Nguyễn Huệ was Hồ Thơm, as well known in the Tây Sơn heartland. And also they trace their roots back to the Hồ dynasty at the turn of the 15th century in Vietnam. And so there is this mythological genealogy about the whole family, the whole clan in Vietnamese history. And he wrote a fictionalized, unofficial history, giả sử, tiểu thuyết hóa, called Kế Thế, which means natural succession, which takes upon a saying in the book of Mencius, Mạnh Tử. And it was written during his imprisonment under the Ngô Đình Diệm regime, but after he was released after the coup of 1963, he published it, this novel Kế Thế, in 1964. And it talks about a messianic genealogy of Quang Trung Nguyễn Huệ as the savior, both politically and spiritually, for the Vietnam race, and how the bloodline of Nguyễn Huệ was preserved despite its defeat and destruction by its nemesis, the Nguyen dynasty that came in its wake. And this notion of messianic genealogy is one of the driving forces behind sectarian mysticism and activism of a sect called the Bửu Sơn Kỳ Hương, which is strange fragrance from the precious mountain, which is very popular in the southern Mekong Delta in the south of Vietnam. And these sectarian activities has common bonds with Chinese sectarian activities. The Buddhist sectarians in Ming-Qing period in China was the White Lotus sect, the Bạch Liên giáo. And so in this novel, Hồ Tường was imagining a kind of alliance with the Bạch Liên giáo, the White Lotus sect in China, to carry out a revolution to liberate China from foreign bondage. And similar to the restorationist banner that Nguyễn Huệ once promoted to restore the Lê dynasty by destroying the Trịnh lords, Phù Lê Diệt Trịnh, that could be adapted into an anti-Manchu slogan, Phản Thanh Phục Minh, to revolt against the Qing Chinese to restore the Ming dynasty in China. So there's this common cause between the Vietnamese and the Chinese in overthrowing its racial enemy. And so he indulged in an abortive fantasy of a preemptive northward advance to liberate China. Of course, that did not come into fruition because Quang Trung Nguyễn Huệ died prematurely at the age of 39. And so, once again, we get back to the idea of a dream about racial revenge. Was it a wise dream and a smart dream and not a crazy dream? Because he is not interested in changing history in the way that the character Đặng Văn Khang in Nguyễn Mạnh Côn story was indulging in. But he wanted to revive the memory of Nguyễn Huệ, to inspire belief in the transformative dream of a great leader. So hopefully, if South Vietnam could have another such leader to inspire people to have a transformative dream to restore to ensure the racial survival and inspire racial retribution, that would be the purpose of Nguyễn Hồ Hữu Tường idea. And this was developed even further by Nguyễn Huệ in his monograph Hồ Thơ Nguyễn Huệ Quang Trung, hay Giấc mộng lớn chưa thành, about Nguyễn Huệ, Quang Trung, Emperor Quang Trung Nguyễn Huệ, and the great unfulfilled dream. And this was a pamphlet that was first serialized in the journal Bách Khoa in the late 1950s, but then published into a monograph form in 1967. And in this monograph, Nguyễn Huệ stoked the existential fear of racial assimilation for fear that the Viet race is being swallowed up by the bigger neighbors from the north, similar to some of the other authors. And as solution, he promoted the idea of racial reassertion in the spirit of something called pan-Vietism, which he compares favorably similar to pan-slavism and pan-Germanism in Europe, in 18th and 19th century Europe. And the racial reassertion would be for the Viet race in Vietnam to be leader of that pan-Vietism, awakening from the amnesia of forgetting about the racial threat from the north. And as a result, this pan-Vietism would inspire a northward advance for the reunification of all of the Viet races, which is currently on Chinese territory. So instead of building a great wall to block out the Chinese as a threat, like the first emperor of China built the Great Wall of China to block out the Huns from the north, it would be much better, in Nguyễn Huě's idea, to build a great sea, to inspire a great sea of people of the Viet, the pan-Vietic race, to prevent the encroachment of the Chinese race on Vietnam. And in conjunction with this idea was the yearning to reclaim the territorial ambitions to reclaim lost lands to China. And that was exemplified by the abortive plans of Nguyễn Huệ. And in this effort, Nguyễn Huệ was compared, the aspiration of Nguyễn Huệ to reclaim lost land to China was compared favorably to Napoleon Bonaparte and Hitler which is a very interesting comparison in Vietnamese history. And I can't help but finding some very humorous and very insightful, actually, development of this idea. The admiration of Hitler during mid-20th century Vietnam was actually a very real and palpable affair. And it was first articulated by Nguyễn Văn Bình in a verse tale in Norman Quốc ngữ called History of Kinh Quang Trung, lịch sử vua Quang Trung. It was written in Nôm and published also in Quốc ngữ in 1953. And he compared Nguyễn Huệ to Napoleon and Hitler as great figures of military power, but without moral virtues. So this is an ambivalent assessment of Nguyễn Huệ through the comparison to Napoleon and Hitler. And with Nguyễn Ngu Ý, as we just mentioned earlier, the comparison with Hitler was for the inspiration toward national salvation from shame and for racial preservation. And interestingly enough, in 1965, the premier of the Republic of Vietnam, Air Marshal Nguyễn Cao Kỳ, in an interview with the Sunday Mirror in 1965, he described admiration for Hitler, and I must quote some of these very salacious remarks of Premier Kỳ. He said that people ask me who my heroes are. I have only one, Hitler. I admire Hitler because he pulled his country together when it was in a terrible state in the early 30s. But the situation here in Vietnam is so desperate now that one man would not be enough. We need 4 or 5 Hitlers in Vietnam. And we can see that shocked the Western audience, and the cartoon by Walter Steinhebler was very suggestive of Premier Kỳ giving the Hail Hitler and admiring Hitler as his hero, and calling for Vietnam to produce 4 or 5 such dictators to deal with the situation. So I find it a very amusing but very insightful example of this dynamic. And coincidentally, under the incumbency of Premier Kỳ, who was a premier from 1965 to 67, the Postal Service of South Vietnam prepared and even printed, but somehow did not issue a set of 2 stamps with the theme, the whole population in solidarity to prepare for a northward advance. Toàn dân đoàn kết, chuẩn bị Bắc tiến. And as we can see on the 3 piaster stamp, the upper one here, you see the population and soldiers of the South was hoisting and planting the South Vietnamese flag right in the heart of North Vietnam, in the DRV capital of Hanoi. And that was such a telling expression of military chauvinism, but somehow it was not articulated, and it was not publicized. It was the stamps remain unpublished, and collectors know about them, but it was not put in circulation back in 1965. And Nguyễn Huệ was admired enough that his picture appeared on the Vietnamese currency as well as the stamps later on in the 1970s as well. So let me move on. And the idea of northern advance has appealed to a military man like Marshal Nguyễn Cao Kỳ and some of the intellectuals that we have described earlier. And it was taken up by the Directorate of Political Warfare in South Vietnam, Cục Chính huấn of Tổng cục Chiến tranh Chính trị, in 1966, and they published a series of history manuals promoting great Vietnamese military heroes such as Lê Lợi, and here in this particular case, Quang Trung. And Quang Trung was held up as an exemplar of loyalty and bravery. And alongside with the exaltation of Quang Trung was the denunciation of Ho Chí Minh and the Democratic Republic of Vietnam as traitors to the Vietnamese national cause, just like King Lê Chiêu Thống for their unholy alliance with the traditional Chinese enemy of the Vietnamese race, which is the alliance between the DRV and the PRC, the Communist Vietnam and Communist China during the Vietnam War. And so can I backtrack? The Political Warfare Directorate also clamored for the liberation of the North and to spur an effort at national unification and reconstruction. Now we move to the expansion of some of these ideas in academic work of historians of the time over the debate over the nature of the conflict of the Vietnam War. What kind of war is the Vietnam War? And alongside the idea of a northern advance to defeat the North and reunify the nation, we also have ideas from Thái Văn Kiểm holding up President Ngô Đình Diệm as reenacting the great endeavors of Nguyễn Huệ and Nguyễn Ánh, using the South as a springboard for a northward advance with the goal of unifying the nation. And in 1968, the Catholic priest, the historian Nguyễn Phương, wrote a book called Việt Nam thời Bành Trướng, Tây Sơn, talking about the divided legacy of territorial expansion in Vietnamese history. And he admired the Tây Sơn panache on the part of a low-born southerner Nguyễn Huệ, who undertook an expansionist northward advance to take down the feudal ruling houses of the Trịnh and the Nguyễn and the Lê, and unifying the country. And that was a key turning point in Vietnamese history, in Nguyễn Phương opinion. And in 1973, the historian Tạ Chí Đại Trường wrote a book with a very telling title, a very provocative title, called The History of Civil War in Vietnam from 1771 to 1802, which is the Tây Sơn period. And in that, he gave credit to the southerner Nguyễn Ánh, who was Nguyễn Huê's nemesis, being victorious thanks to superior Western technology, just like the Republic of Vietnam would profit from superior military and technological advances from the US and from the West to become victorious over its northern Vietnamese foe. And the idea of Southern exceptionalism was a natural corollary from this idea that the South, being the last part to be incorporated into the Vietnamese polity in the 18th century, compared to the 2,000-odd years of the long span of Vietnamese history, the South came to Vietnam rather late, and therefore it harbors a kind of youthful vitality that contrasts starkly with the northern decay of the desiccated North. And this is the idea promoted by Tạ Chí Đại Trường. Very tellingly, another Catholic priest, Thanh Lãng, he wrote a postface to a book in 1975 by the late poet and literary critic Đông Hồ Lớn Tấn Phát, in the book Văn học miền Nam, Văn học Hà Tiên. In 1977, in the postface, Thanh Lãng talks about the cultural innovations of the young southern part of the country, which would lead it to a victorious political destiny. And the history of Vietnam, in Thanh Lãng's opinion, is that the history of the North was of the initial southward advance to expand the country southward because to resist Chinese from the north. Whereas the history of the southern part of Vietnam would be to return to the north with a northward advance to correct the mistakes and unify the homeland. And they cite as precedent the Southerners, Nguyễn Huệ and Nguyễn Ánh, who both came from the South to conquer the North, and therefore the historic mission of the South is to renew and liberate the North, in this case from communism. But as we well know, history did not repeat in this case. In 1975, the US and the North Vietnamese signed the Paris Accord, allowing for the withdrawal of US troops, and then shortly thereafter, Saigon and the Republic of Vietnam fell in April 30th, 1975 to advancing northern troops, and we are commemorating the 50th anniversary of that event during this conference. And therefore, instead of a southern conquest of the North, it was a northern conquest of the South. But instead of an anti-imperialist war of resistance against the Americans, as the North Vietnamese would like to expound, the end game turned out to be the blunt and brutal civil war in which one side of the Vietnamese conquered the other. And so, as I have hoped to have shown during my presentation and my longer paper that I have sent John Burns to read, we have explored the many counterfactual discursive possibilities about racial survival and retribution in the works of these authors, such as Nguyễn Mạnh Côn, who talked about the alternative streams of history, Hồ Hữu Tường, who talked about sectarian mythologization, and Nguyễn Ngụ Ý, who talked about the great unfulfilled dream, and Nguyễn Cao Kỳ, admiring Hitler. And we see during those expressions the manifestation of an alternative regiocentric history grounded in the history and legacy of the South, which claims for itself a victorious destiny for the Republic of Vietnam. And this has been expounded by the discourse on Southern vitality and exceptionalism in the work of Nguyễn Phương, Tại Chí Đại Trưởng, and Thanh Lãng. But unfortunately, as we have seen, history did not repeat itself. And so now today, on the 50th anniversary of the fall of Saigon, we look back at this little-known episode of Vietnamese intellectual history and historiography. Why do we do that? Because I hope that we can recover the silenced voices of the vanquished. We have heard so much from the perspective of the Americans, from the perspective of the North Vietnamese, who were the victors, but the South Vietnamese has not been given very prominent voice in the studies of the Vietnam War. And I hope that it will be given greater voice as we reflect on this occasion. And my paper is a small contribution in that effort. And so thank you so much for your attention.